And I encourage everybody to write questions that I don't have to flip the card over. Please write something succinct. It's because I have to listen to what they say. So I'm Joe Eskenazi, I'm the managing editor. I took the care to wear the same outfit that I'm wearing in my profile photo today. And this is Will Jarrett and Joe Rivano Barros. And so like you finally get to see this is what they look like outside of their small profile photos. Thank you for coming out on a Tuesday. A fine day to get you all out here at Manny's and talk about campaign donations in a just concluded election. So, you know, a hot draw, and we're glad that you're here instead of watching the Giants or anything like that. I want to start out, you may have all seen the graphic that Will not only made the graphics, he had to do all of the underlying work in order to figure out how much everybody gave as best as we can tell. And so I want to start out by asking Will how much work this was, because there were times during the project, which took a while, that if you've ever seen the movie Shine, the pianist David Helfgott has a break with reality because of his obsessive attempt to try and master Rachmaninoff's Third, and I was worried that this would be your Rachmaninoff's Third. So tell us a little bit about why this is not easy.
Yeah, sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good stuff. Okay. Yeah, I had a full head of hair at the beginning of this project. No, I guess there are a few reasons why it is tricky to try and find like absolute numbers in terms of campaign giving, and I've written them down so that I don't miss any. So one moment. Right. I guess the first thing to say is that a lot of these things come from lots of different sources. So you've got the Elections Commission does great work in terms of getting all of the donations together for most local races, and so that was the main thing that I was using. But then there's also state races, and that's kind of done through things called Cal Access and Netfile. And then there's a bunch of stuff that isn't ever disclosed through in kind of campaign finance filings. And so sometimes you'll be looking at 990s, which are things that non-profits need to give, that kind of thing. And so it's kind of pulling from all of those, which is a million different, quite often like PDFs rather than anything that's been put into a nice workable database, and then trying to use that. So that's one issue, is aggregating all of this stuff that's in lots of different formats that aren't necessarily in the right, the way that you'd want them to be there. And then there's also the issue of trying to figure out what has been disclosed and what has not been disclosed. For instance, if someone gives a ton of money to a C3, which is a type of non-profit, and then that C3 uses it on things that are kind of, they can't use it directly to give to a campaign, but they can use it for issues advocacy and that kind of thing. But if someone gives a load of money to a C3, it doesn't have to be disclosed. So that's kind of something you're trying to find other ways of trying to get to that money. There's kind of a similar thing with C4s, where money that goes directly into a C4, which is another type of non-profit, then goes, they can pay half of that towards campaign finance stuff, and they need to disclose that, but then they only need to disclose the most recent donors up to the amount that they've got, so you don't see every donor from that. And then there's impacts, they should all be disclosed, but sometimes they're disclosed late, and sometimes the disclosures haven't happened yet, and sometimes there is double counting of disclosures. So as you can imagine, it's kind of a nightmare to try and figure out one way of saying this is everything, and this, and also I guess like there was the issue that we came across, which is more of like an editorial thing, which is just figuring out which things to include on here, because like one of the biggest contributions that we've included on here was Michael Moritz giving to the SF Standard, for instance, which I think is valuable to have up there, but it's clearly not the same kind of a thing as pouring money into like an electoral race. It's like quite a separate. So yeah, there's all of these different things, and you're trying to, and there's a million edge cases in various ways. Yeah, now that, so I left Mission Local 2 weeks ago, so now that has been handed over to our wonderful data team to continue.
We can't keep them forever. The visa doesn't last forever, unfortunately. If someone wanted to play games, what are the ways that you found that they could do it? If people didn't want you to find things, and which, by the way, even just going over the straightforward ways that to track it is hard. What if somebody was trying to conceal their involvement in their spending?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of a bunch of ways that that can happen. So kind of by dint of the fact that most of the things we've got up here are things that have been disclosed, simply because if they're not disclosed, very hard to kind of write about them. But there are various points at which you can see where disclosures would be slightly tricky. I guess the one that's been talked about the most is would be Brooke Jenkins taking money from the Neighbors for a Better San Francisco C3 back in 2022 when she was volunteering for the Chaser Bodine recall. Now, as I said previously, C3s can't give in terms of direct political donations. And so what this was, it was payments for Jenkins to do unrelated consulting at the same time that she was volunteering for the Bodine recall. But at the same time, Neighbors for a Better San Francisco Advocacy, which is a slightly separate group with a slightly different name, was the main donor to the Chaser Bodine recall. And so you kind of get these things where it's like, it's kind of gray in terms of what counts as a political donation and what doesn't. And in that case as well, it wasn't just Neighbors giving directly to Brooke Jenkins, it was also Neighbors gave separate payments to 2 other nonprofits, which in turn paid Jenkins again for unrelated kind of work for those nonprofits.
Go to the liquor store and buy us a pack of smokes, that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's. Tell us. I guess we should take a step back, Joe. And who are the stars of this film? You know, who is pouring lots and lots of money into San Francisco's election cycle? And you know, how is it different from well-off people who have ideas about how San Francisco should look and behave and have been doing this in the past?
There's stars in terms of the donors and then in terms of the actors here. So maybe we can start with the actors, and you can kind of see from the size of the bubbles, which Will made according to kind of the number of links in this network. And the biggest one is Neighbors for a Better San Francisco. So it has by far just received the most in money, it has spent the most in money. It has usually funded public safety related things. So as Will mentioned, it was the biggest donor to the Chaser Bodine recalls. It was the biggest donor to the school board recalls as well, and it has since given to Proposition B in March and just kind of associated policing measures over the years. Then there's, and Neighbors is mostly funded by John Kilroy, who is a real estate guy in Kilroy Real Estate. I think 1.2 million was the latest figure. William Oberndorf, who is a Republican mega donor, sits on the board of, I always forget if it's the C3 or the C4, but anyway, he's involved in both of them, I think in some capacity. And then there's a host of mostly tech and real estate donors here. So folks like Chris Larson, who is the CEO of Ripple, or the chairman of Ripple, which is a cryptocurrency firm, and who is recently in trouble with the SEC for some $2 billion. There is Ron Conway, who is a heavy donor. Folks like Gary Tan are also donors, less to Neighbors and more to another group called Grow SF, which is also a heavy actor here, but less on the money side and more on kind of throwing house parties, doing mailers, kind of a socializing aspect here of bringing people into a political movement and training them to enter politics. So in general, I mean, we have a lot of real estate tycoons, we have a lot of tech billionaires and executives who are giving money to all of these associated groups, and some of these groups are giving money to each other as well.
It is a matryoshka in that, but help me understand what's different. Because when I first started covering San Francisco politics, it was Don Fisher, who you could assume his first name was actually Republican billionaire Don Fisher, and then it was Warren Hellman would give money and others like that, and now we have and they had groups that they founded like SFSOS, and they tried their hardest to get rid of annoying progressive tenderloin supervisors like Chris Daly at the time, and now you fast forward a generation and it's groups like this trying to get rid of Dean Preston. What's different in everyone's view from where we've gone before with well-off people, old money, new money, trying to use that to influence San Francisco politics?
I think there's a couple things that seem more different when we talk to kind of the political consultants and other politicos that have been here for a long time. One of them is that the biggest spends in past San Francisco history tended to be kind of one-off issues. So I was just actually looking through the filings this week, and by far the biggest were the soda tax fights and then the e-cigarette ban fights. So that's when Juul, say, or the American Beverage Association spends something like $30 million to fight a particular corporate danger, so a measure that San Francisco is going to enact. That's a one-off, maybe two-off, 2 election seasons, something like that. Now these are lasting for longer. These are lasting for 4 years, maybe even. I mean, some of them have said that they want to last for decades. So these are creating nonprofits, C4s, that will be here and be able to take money and spend money for many, many years. Not just fighting a single corporate danger, but kind of shaping the ideology of their donors and imparting that ideology onto San Francisco politics. And then the other thing that's a little different is that in the past it used to be seemingly more downtown-centric, kind of, real estate, yes, but kind of downtown business. They wanted lower taxes. It was very predictable, but it was kind of just, capitalism with the happy face type giving. Now it's a bit more ideological seemingly, and the donors seemed more aggrieved. They're very rich people who act as if there's, they're acting like they've been personally hurt here. And one of the consultants that I spoke to said that, when you have these rich people kind of acting in this way and spending money to reflect that, it can get very dangerous very quickly and heat up the conversation very quickly. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing. They're tossing money around here and funding these kinds of, Proposition E, Proposition F. Seemingly, they're more right-wing measures than we've seen in the city in the past.
Now, consultants tell me you can't buy an election, but on the other hand, the name of the television show wasn't Lifestyles of the Poor and Unknown. I'm wondering if any of the data that you or your colleagues, our colleagues, have collected, have looked to see how efficacious some of the spending was, who got what they wanted, and who didn't.
That's a good question.
And we can manipulate this too.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the first thing to say is that it's kind of very hard to do counterfactuals. If you spend several million in a race and then say, oh, without that, this would have happened, you can't really, it's very hard to do that. And there's also confounding things like, when it comes to the DCCC race that was recently, for instance, one slate got a hell of a lot more money. The more right-leaning slate got more money than the more left-leaning slate by about 3-1, I think.
And that's just what we can check. The consultants I spoke with said that the slant will be more emphasized if you count mailers, which is, we're getting into advanced things here. But suffice to say, one side outspent another by multiples.
Yeah, and then I guess the takeaway from that was that the Democrats for Change, the more moderate group, they had a much better election than they first thought they were going to do. They got, was it 18 out of the 24 seats in the end? And I think you were being told at that point that people were expecting about 10.
They would have been happy with 10.
Yeah. And so on the one hand, you can say, great, money works, but then it's also kind of hard to say whether or not it's because people were on that slate that people voted for them that way, it's all wrapped up in that. And it's kind of telling that the people on the progressive side, I think 4 of 6 of them were either supervisors or they used to be supervisors. So it was name recognition was super important for those guys. And on the other side, everyone was voting by the slate. But they outspent them 3 times and got a much better result than they thought they would. There's a whole bunch of things in which they put money in and got good results. And another one would be the school board recall was one of the early ones where I think the people who were being targeted for a recall were outspent. I think was it 25-1 or something by the end. I think it started out as about 40-1 and then that closed. And then that overwhelmingly voted out. What else have we got? We got the Bodine recall was another in which it was, what was that? Was that 2-1? That they were outspent in that race. But there are also instances in which it hasn't worked out. For instance, Prop D in 2022, an awful lot of money went into that, and that was the affordable housing bond that was then in conflict with the other affordable housing bond that was Prop E, and they kind of cannibalized each other's votes and meant that none of them passed. Prop E did better, but it still didn't get there. So there are limits to what the money can do. Although it's also worth mentioning that not all of the spending directly results in election results straight away. For instance, like that, a hell of a lot of money was spent by neighbors sent to a group called Connected SF that did a lot of redistricting advocacy, which was looking for, was trying to push the versions of the maps that were seen to benefit moderates more. And that was, I don't know how many of you recall that kind of, that wild process, but yeah, so I would say that
let's go more into depth of that.
Yeah.
I mean, the least we could do is Will had to stay at those meetings until 4 a.m. The old line is, "I've suffered for my music, and now it's your turn." Will was there until 4 a.m. We had at least one 19-hour meeting. We had board members walking out in protest. We had board members calling into their own meetings and excoriating each other in foul language that would make Richard Pryor blush. This was an unusual process, but at the base of it, it's like sand at the beach. Money gets into everything. Explain a little bit about how this was a well-laid plan here.
Yeah, I guess the stuff that we can see from the filings is the neighbors sent $400,000 to, there was a group called Connected SF that was run by Marie Hurabil. I always get that wrong, I'm so sorry. And yeah, she was, and eventually the maps got changed into a way that some said benefited moderates, and then you see for instance, Joe Longardio's precinct got moved into 4. That was after he had 3 attempts at getting elected in D7. And then this time around, he got elected into D4, and the precincts that were moved during redistricting were the ones that made the difference. Like
It was the margin of victory.
Yeah. So you could see that as quite a clear, that's if you were an investor who was looking to try and get more progressives on the board, that $400,000 was a very good investment, I would say.
Off the board.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess a similar note to that would be the kind of the media stuff, where you've got, for instance, during the Chaser Bodine recall, $100,000 went to Susan Reynolds to write about him. $100,000 went to
Stanley Roberts.
Mr. Badley Productions, Stanley Roberts. Grow SF now owns the Bold Italic, which does a lot of kind of re-upping the members of Grow SF's leadership. Retweeting Gary Tan and Sachin. And
That one I can't help you with.
Sachin Agarwal, and then Stephen Buss. So yeah, it's kind of those kind of soft things as well as just the election results that I think we need to look at. There's this money going in to kind of to frame narratives and create this kind of these other victories that are not electoral.
So Joe, if I had to break this down, he's going to do the how, and Joe will do the why. And so the question is, what is the goal here? Again, a generation ago, we have ads from SFSOS with a photograph of human excrement and human urine, saying that the number 1 problem with Chris Daly is number 2. And I'm not sure things have advanced beyond that, but certainly we don't use Comic Sans on mailers anymore. Like, we don't do that anymore. But what is the goal here? It's what is the vision?
I mean, there is maybe before the vision, we can talk about how monumental 2024 is as in terms of the goals for these groups. I mean, the DCCC was a huge coup. Like Joe said, they hoped for 10 out of the 24 seats and got a majority, and that will mean that they control the endorsements going into November, which will be very interesting in a mayoral race. I mean, when you have a slate of moderate candidates, so that is a huge seat of power. And then you have the Progressive Board of Supervisors, which has been progressive since 2018. Flipping that also will get you the legislative branch. And then you have this ballot measure, rather 2 ballot measures from Together SF, which seek to bolster mayoral power by kind of enabling the mayor to fire and hire more easily, have deputy mayors, and then kind of capping the number of commissions in the city. So you have this kind of attempt to do structural change here, and that's what a lot of the folks that I talked to is particularly impressed by the kind of eye on the ball of the structural change for the ballot measures. So,
and I'm assuming this time they wrote them so they don't actually do the opposite of their intended purpose, correct?
Right.
Okay.
There was, the first stab at this from Together SF, they actually withdrew the measure when the mayor's office said, hey, actually this is going to make the board more powerful, not less. They've learned their lesson. The vision...
Put some of that money towards getting someone to write this thing.
The vision, I mean, I think that there is a lot of... it's interesting when you go back through the filings, in particular for Neighbors, which is the biggest one of these groups. In 2020, when they first started getting involved, there was a lot of spending on just kind of typical get rid of the progressives, some various kind of anti-tax measures, and then it pretty quickly coalesced into public safety related spending to do with CHESA, and then to do with the school board recall. So it was a lot of kind of getting onto voter anger, and then fueling and being fueled by that voter anger. I mean, I think there's a give and take there, and I see that a lot with these groups. That there's clearly a lot of frustration with San Francisco, and there's a hyper focus on the kind of public safety related measures, which I think we all whereas 8 years ago maybe this was all about housing and market rate housing, now it's really about cops and drug use and how dirty are the streets and how is our quality of life, and solutions, quote unquote, like Proposition E to kind of make it easier to chase cars, or for police to engage in vehicle chases, and drug screening welfare recipients. Like,
doesn't it seem quaint that that under Ed-Lee's term the number one issue he said was jobs?
Yeah, very quaint. But the kinds of the kinds of solutions proffered here, is it really going to change the city? Is it really going to turn around the city if the cops are able to chase more people in their cars? If you screen, like, I think there was a total of 3,000 welfare recipients that would even apply to. Like, they are solutions that are meant to address quality of life issues. That whereas like the issues of 8 years ago or 10 years ago around housing, which is like unquestionably the most important thing in San Francisco, it's just hard for me to see how this is really the thing that's defining the hardship of San Franciscans.
Well, let's differentiate them. This is not a monolith. These groups, right now I've written that there's moderate on moderate violence coming. They will have to choose at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this. It's very clear for us where the chips will fall. So Neighbors and Together SF are going to go for Feral, and Grow SF and Abundant SF will go for Breed. And the difference here seems to be, and like I said, Neighbors' giving has been geared towards public safety, and Abundant SF, Grow SF, they are more urbanist. They do care about they care about bike lanes, they care about market rate housing. They're YIMBYs, they actually want, they were heavily involved in keeping the Great Highway and JFK Drive car free. Like that is an issue that a lot of these folks care about. And so you have this kind of uneasy coalition of folks that are pro-police, concerned with public safety, concerned with safety on our streets, and then folks who are more come into politics because they care about affordability, they care about market rate, building more housing, they care about kind of the middle class being able to afford to live here, and they care about themselves as kind of young, upwardly mobile folks being able to not pay that much as renters. So we're going to see a big divide, a big rift in November.
And where's the money going to go? Why would I donate money to a group that doesn't support my mayoral candidate? Why not just give it straight to his IE or her IE? Independent expenditure campaign.
I think you will see a lot of that, right? Just going straight to the IEs, to the mayoral IEs. I mean, yeah, and as you said, as you pointed out in your earlier reporting, one of the committees backing the Together SF ballot measures, which will bolster mayoral power, is controlled by Mark Farrell. So you can already see the battle lines being drawn here.
Again, I don't think that was an accident. If I can step out of the interlocutor role here, you have two ballot measures in which whoever is controlling that committee can collect unlimited donations, and you have someone running for mayor, not the mayor, running on this, and you could give money to that, an unlimited amount of money, which is tantamount to a mayoral donation. So this is clever politics. We can all argue about whether this is good for democracy, but it is clever politics.
I guess it will also be interesting to see whether or not because I think until now quite a lot of the groups have kind of been helping each other with fundraising and stuff like that. Like you've got Abundant SF will host a class in which they will invite people from Grow SF and Together SF and that kind of thing, and then say, hey, by the way, there's also this group. And so it's been a lot of quite good organizing by these groups to kind of help each other out. And I'm wondering, with this fracturing of like the donor bases and who they're going for mayor, whether, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic changes.
Yeah.
So what are the lessons that we can glean from March's election, with the caveat that March's election was March's election, and that we have a completely different electorate in November, and the stakes are higher, not just locally, but of course nationally. You know, how much can we use it as an analog, and how much would that be a false comparison?
I think the caveats are as you mentioned earlier, you know, this is a low turnout election, so it was 46.6%, I think. That means that these are voters who kind of go to the polls knowing what they're going to go for the most part. So they can be swayed, but to an extent. That's not going to be the case in November. There are going to be a lot of lower information voters, and money's going to matter a lot more there. So I think the biggest lesson is that it was more than $11 million spent in March. It's going to be a multiple of that in November because there's so much at stake here. I mean, the control of the mayor, control of the board, and then kind of the structure of mayoral power in a way that maybe hasn't been the case since the board went against Willie Brown in the early 2000s. So the biggest lesson for me is that we're going to just see an influx of money in the elections. And then there's also, you know, there was the limit to how much money mattered in terms of the judicial elections, which was interesting. I mean, there you had $2 million, it was a $2 million race, but both the incumbents kept their seats.
And not close.
Not particularly close. I mean, it was about 45-55 for each one or something like that.
The Beggart, it was close to 60-40. I think it was 62-38, and Thompson, I think it was 55-45. So that's something we put a lot of thought into. You know, at some point it's like analyzing the basketball game, you know, but at some point you can actually look at the results and you can look at, you know, what people did. And it was not easy on election day to decipher these results. Why, when there was such a discrepancy between Democrats for Change and the Labor and Working Families DCCC race, did it reflect that? But why did it not reflect that with the judicial races? And I have my thoughts, but what do you guys think?
I mean, these are half-baked thoughts, but I think that there is still something a little holy for voters in terms of what the judiciary is. You know, they don't want politics in that. They're more accustomed, voters, and, you know, we're all more accustomed to having these kinds of fights for our office, our representatives, and our supervisors and mayor, that there's something about electing a judge and switching over a judge that just, I don't think the money mattered as much as it would have. I don't think the campaign mattered as much there.
I wonder if maybe there's an element of that. Those campaigns were just conducted less convincingly as well. I remember you had a story in which a lot of the quotes that were being relied on by Stop Crime SF to talk about one of the incumbent judges. They had a bunch of different quotes, and then it turned out that they were all from the same person, and it was made to look like there was this big backlash against him. But
and they cleaned up incredibly semi-grammatical English as well. That, if anything, this is going to be a reference that nobody will get, but I hope you will laugh at it, because it reminded me of a comic book that gave great joy in college called Canadian Ninja. And it was the worst translated French to English you could ever find. And that is what the actual quotes on the internet about Judge Michael Baker looked like. They were written in such a way as that it was, you know, it sounded like badly translated French to English, but they were cleaned up to sound grammatical when placed on the Stop Crime SF report card for judges. And what's more, they all came from one disgruntled participant in family court, which, by the way, are there happy participants in family court? There was one disgruntled participant in family court, and they split it into 4 different quotes as if it was from 4 different sources. I don't know that that's why people did what they did. And this is, maybe you have your opinions, I don't know how much of this is applicable to a judicial election because of the reasons that Joe enumerated, and how much of it is, I know what judges do. Whereas like with the DCCC, I can tell you, and you probably have this experience if you're an active voter, when my wife looked at the list, she looked up at me and there was an anger there. Why am I voting on this? What is this? Who are these people? So that's the ultimate down ballot race. So if there's anything susceptible to a slate campaign and money, it would be that. On the other hand, I don't see that people have any kind of holiness in dumping a supervisor.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite the same thing.
And I think when I talk to the progressives as well, like we have to acknowledge they ran a hell of a campaign on the DCCC. I mean, they were out there knocking doors. I mean, they called a bunch of people. Money certainly helps you do that. I mean, it helps you hire people who can phone bank and knock on doors and canvass. And for a race this down ballot, that matters. I mean, having, being able to say, hey, he actually came to my door, or someone with him, supporting him came to my door and gave me a sign, that matters a lot.
And we could also see from looking at like the individual ballots that a lot more people voted for every single one of the Democrats for Change than voted for every single one of the Labour and Working Family slate. So you can see that like people were looking at the slate list and ticking things off based on that.
Yeah, by a high degree. I think it was a 3-1, wasn't it? It was a significant amount. And something else that Will was able to glean is that the Republican recommendations actually carried more weight in this last election than the Democratic ones. That was an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, and there was more agreement between the suggestions that were put out by Grow SF and Together SF and the Republicans than there was between them and the Democrats, which I guess you could take as saying something either about Together SF and Grow SF, or depending on your politics, you could say something about the local Democrat Party. But yeah, it's just interesting that I found a lot of people were saying that it's incorrect to say that these guys are more right-leaning and that they describe themselves still as progressives, but the slate that they put out was more in line with the local Republican Party than the local Democrat Party.
Something I'm looking at is, what are the strategies going to be in November? I think that the amount of money we're talking about here, tens of millions of dollars is a lot of money, but not to the people who are making the donations, and certainly not when there's unlimited donations in an independent expenditure campaign. This is what I like to call toothpaste money, right? So is there a strategy, or is it just that you can drown the opposition with vast torrents of money? And what does a wise investment look like here?
I'm not sure. I mean, it does seem like you said, this is pocket change. So, I mean, on the one hand, yes, you can just drown the opposition vast amounts of money. And like I said, it helps to have door knockers and phone bankers and signs. I mean, that's all stuff that money buys. So you can have, as long as you have a decently run campaign, the money is going to help there. So I would say that's certainly a lesson. In terms of what, specific, I mean, when one of the lessons about on the March 5th election, seemingly on the progressive side at least, is we got to stop just talking about, or they got to stop just talking about billionaires controlling this, and they need
I'm glad you brought that up.
And you've said this as much in your columns. What were the progressive solutions to drug use and to policing and to property crimes and car break-ins? There was a question mark there about what are progressives proffering and what are they offering here. And I think that will be a lesson going into November, is that there's going to be, you can expect to see several progressive ballot measures to bring out folks to vote, so that people will rally around those candidates, Dean Preston and Peskin and whomever. They'll certainly have their own ballot measures. There will be more of an attempt to, I think, create solutions that we're missing in March.
And that's something, this is not really a money question, but why does this doesn't seem to resonate with people? I mean, certainly, I've always found that money is more interesting to me than endorsements, because endorsements is just paying back favors. But pointing out that, this person has insidious people backing him, or this people has people backing him who probably don't share your overall worldview, your interests, does not seem to be a winning strategy. Look who's donating to him, has not won anything in San Francisco yet. Are we unique to that? I mean, is that something that should be surprising?
I mean, I think that maybe it is the sign of just the level of frustration. We're in a more, at a time when things are more in control, maybe voters pay attention to those kinds of things. And now, because there's just so much frustration with the state of the city, people are more willing to forget who is backing them. And the fact that, you know, Gary Tam calls for supervisors to die and makes a joke about that. Like, maybe people are willing to look past that because they actually agree on the issues and they think that things are in a state of crisis. But I'm not sure.
I also think, and this is kind of like at a tangent to your question, but I guess I kind of just want to put it out there that even if people decide that they don't care about who's funded various measures, and that's like totally your prerogative, I think it's also very, very helpful for it to still be there. And I think some of the feedback we got from some angry people on Twitter when we put these kinds of stories out was, you know, we don't care. Like we're very happy to go, we agree with the billionaires, and so kudos to them for giving us the money. And I think, like, if that's the case, then great, you know, but it still is good to know where the money for these things is coming from. And so, yeah, I think it's useful to put out into the universe, even if people are saying that it doesn't swing how they feel.
What do you think?
I don't think people care. I don't. Not enough to make a difference. I don't. And I think that San Francisco is not exactly the same as the rest of the country, but I think that this is our own equivalent of overlooking, you know, obvious flaws with things in order to advance what we want. And I don't think that we're offered really. In San Francisco there is usually, if not a binary choice, it's close to it. So, like, you know, what are you going to do? Now with mayor it's a little bit different, but also, you know, it does feel a little bit like all the variations of COLA sometimes, you know, with at least with the candidates that are in there now. And so I would say that I don't think it's something that really compels people. I agree with Will, that, like, there's nothing, to my mind, there's nothing more important than tracing monetary transactions. Endorsements are fickle. I mean, I still remember, you know, the deals between Newsom and the Clintons and all that kind of stuff. And so why should it matter to me that someone's just, you know, settling an old score, you know, like scratching someone's back as you'd expect. That doesn't matter to me, but what matters to me is who's paying whom, because that person obviously expects something. And it can be presented as an organic thing where it's like, I'm supporting the person that I want to do the things that he would do anyway. Or you know, it can be a more realpolitik view of this person will pick up the phone for me. Or this person, you know, will certainly not pick up the phone for the people I tell them to not pick up the phone for. So that's something I would look at. By the way, as if you needed a inspiration here, certainly as we have wandered a little bit off of straight dollars and cents, you're entitled to give me the cards, or certainly, you know, get the cards moving forward here. I'm just wondering, you know, Will, what was going through your mind as you struggled to complete this project? And were there ever points where where it seeped into your subconscious and you would wake up thinking about 501c3s?
Yes.
Did the ring keep moving in the dream?
I guess the thing that bothered me most, I think, was it's almost like a design problem that bleeds over into a real problem as to, like, what we show on here, because there's only a certain amount of groups and donors and kind of entities and their connections that you're able to show. And so that was really tricky in terms of figuring out, you know, like there are some things on there that maybe should have been on there but weren't, like props I and J in 2022 about the JFK stuff probably should have been on there, because these guys all came together and gave to that. But in the end, like, there's so much that it was in terms of, like, we were trying to figure out, you know, what the most prescient things are for people to understand how these groups work. So that kind of bothered me a lot, I think. What else? I've written down a list.
Keep going. And
yeah.
These are some good questions, by the way. Thank you for sending them up.
These are my gripes now that I've left Mission Local. The other interesting thing, and this is something that we talked about beforehand, but we were unsure of whether or not to call this, the working title for this was Mod Money, as in like mod money, mod problems. But in the end, we went for BigMoneySF, and the article we didn't call anyone moderates, and the reason for that, it was a thing that we talked about a lot, and but the reasoning was basically that we saw that certain props that were being funded by these like a prop to give police more surveillance capabilities with drones and so on, and to screen welfare recipients. I think in any place they would be called conservative, and like whether or not you think that they're good or bad, I think that's like a decent descriptor. And so in the end we went away from that, but it was also kind of like, people are just using moderates and liberals and progressives as like labels. They kind of understand what it is, and it makes it a lot more confusing. And so that was another thing that was kind of going through my mind.
That's
a lot.
its own conversation, and it's you don't have to use you don't have to describe the short and ugly team as tall and pretty, but like on the other hand, there are definitely two distinctive channels of funding, and there's two distinctive lines of candidates and issues in San Francisco, and you can call them what you want. I mean, Art Agnos will tell you that he was called a liberal. These are relatively recent coinings of these terms, but yes, that is why we didn't use the excellent term mod money. Actually, I believe that your original term was the constellation of moderation.
We went through a lot of
So someone has a very good nuts and bolts question here, and also has incredibly good penmanship, which says, can you explain how a candidate running for DCCC and district supervisors bend/abuse campaign finance laws to benefit their supervisorial campaign?
Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but my understanding is that you're able. So with the DCCC campaign, you're allowed to take unlimited donations from an unlimited amount of people, and they can pay however much they want.
And corporations.
And it's just like a money free for all in the DCCC. And then you compare that to running for supervisor or another kind of entity like that, and then you've got individual donations are capped at $500 if you're giving directly to the candidate. And so what a lot of people did is they will use the DCCC as a way of massively boosting their profile by, collecting a ton of money, spending it with your face on it. And so when November rolls around, you've got name recognition. And you can see the bleed over. I think, was it Bilal Mahmood who accidentally sent out a load of things which was saying that he was running for supervisor using the money that was for DCCC, so you can really see the bleed across those kinds of campaigns.
That's more or less it here. We have another good question here, and Will, this is a technical one, but somebody clearly wants to know this. For Will, if you could give recommendations on how to solve the problem of aggregating all the data sets that made up your infographic, what would they be?
I would say that a great place to start is the Ethics Commission website, because that's got most of what you'll want for local races. If you want to, I don't know, in terms of getting stuff in there that isn't going directly to elections, but it's stuff like 990s, where it's like a non-profit has given a load of money to a media organization, for instance. I didn't find a better way of doing that other than going through them PDF by PDF, which is
laborious.
Yeah, not a great, not a great system. I wouldn't recommend that, but I don't know of any better one. And then in terms of the state stuff, so the places you'll want to go are the Cal Access website, where you can just download a big Excel file, which is super useful. And then for bits and pieces that kind of fall through the cracks of them, you'll want to look up something called Netfile, which has just a massive bucket filled with all of the PDF filings.
So here's another question that gets to the heart of editorial decisions on why to list this and why you don't have a corresponding one for more progressive-leaning donors. And it says, why can't/don't progressive groups play the money game? Is anyone trying?
I mean, yeah, so to the point of why we didn't do this for the progressive side, it's just there's less money there. There's not that much money. And when we put out this story, we had a lot of people asking us to look into, well, what about the League of Pissed Off Voters? Who's funding them? There's this shadowy cabal here. And I looked up their latest 460 and they had $10,000 in the bank. I mean, that was it.
$10,000 American.
Yeah. And I think it was over 10 years, it was 114.
Yeah.
Oh, like, you know, this is chump change compared to the spending here. So it's just a different ball game. It's a different thing altogether. I'm sorry, I already forgot the question.
Why are progressives not playing the money game?
Well, I mean, I don't think that there's a financial interest for wealthy people to fund progressive issues.
If you look at it's kind of another one of the reasons why I think this kind of thing works better for the moderate side as opposed to the progressive, or the right-leaning side as opposed to the progressive side, is not only the difference in how much money there is, but it seems to be like vast majority of the money on the progressive side is like it comes from unions.
Yeah.
Like that's the story. Whereas here you've got like these massive like networks of billionaires, and it's a bit more intricate, and there's a lot of different kind of unusual coalitions, and so it's kind of more useful to have something like this where you're tying people together and saying this person's leading this one, they've given to this, etc. But the other side, it's like, it's the ACLU, SEIU, and like other big.
And there's not really an attempt to obfuscate the source of the money. The DCCC slate was the labor and working family slate. The joke I had that eluded some people, but like there surely must be some working families involved, but mostly it was labor. So, that's not a mystery. I think it didn't used to be such a monolith with labor, though. This strikes me as being more and more, what's left at the bottom of the cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true, and I think that the progressives are constantly kind of searching for their local Soros, or kind of a liberal billionaire that might fund the entire movement. But like you said, I think it's just the unions are the only ones with really the deep pockets here on that side.
And labor does a lot of things in San Francisco, there's no doubt. This is a labor town, and there are some outrageous situations for sure. We don't have 2 drivers in the Muni trains anymore, that we don't do that. But labor does a lot in San Francisco, and it is still hard to be an anti-labor politician, though I can tell you labor went all in against Joe Eskenazi when they lost that race. So that's a sign that, when you pick fights, you have to win them. A question here says, how much of this money is coming from people who do not live in San Francisco? This is something that they actually do trace on the ethics page.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not sure.
I can tell you that the biggest donor to San Francisco politics over the last 5 or 6 or 7 years has been Mikey from Medford, former Mayor Bloomberg, and he certainly doesn't come from San Francisco, and he's also dropped $200,000 on the mayor. So stuff like that throws off the balance a little bit. Years ago I wrote a story about how literally most of the money in boxing in Nevada was won by Floyd Mayweather. He won more than every other boxer in the entire state, and that throws off the measure. So like, the amount of money that Joe brings up that Mike Bloomberg put into 2 measures that you may not even remember, I think it was sugar beverage tax and anti-vaping, and the amount of money was astounding. Throws it off a bit. So I would say that a lot of the money comes from out of San Francisco. When you take Bloomberg out of it, it might not look quite the same.
It's also worth mentioning that, so I don't have a good answer to this, I can't off the top of my head. There is a quite good tool on the Ethics Commission website where they do show where money has come from for all of their donations. One word of warning on that is that if there's say there's a PAC that's incorporated outside of the city, a ton of people give to the PAC, and then the PAC gives to San Francisco, even if a load of the donors were from San Francisco, it says that it's money coming from out of the city. So it's kind of, it's another one of those things where it makes it super hard because of these kind of nested structures. It makes it kind of hard to know exactly where that's coming from. But yeah, I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head the kind of raw numbers.
I think I don't know either, but I think another problem you have is that some folks, I think Ron Conway and does what Willie Brown did for a long time, which is that he has an address at a downtown hotel and that's where he's registered to vote, but he doesn't live there. But so a lot of folks have addresses in the city and they're registered to vote here and they're residents here, but they spend most of their time who knows where.
We have another question here that's not money related, or maybe it is. It talks about how the DCCC slate for the labor and working families lost big time. Who is responsible for not getting out that vote, and what has changed? Because in the past, the DCCC spending has been asymmetrical, and it hasn't mattered. In fact, on the prior election cycle, I think that progressives took 22 out of the 24 seats. That didn't happen this time with asymmetrical spending. So in your views, who dropped the ball here, and what changed?
I don't know about the DCCC in particular, but I guess it is worth pointing out that like the organizing on the moderate side has been generally better as well. I mean, a lot of money helps with that because you get to do all sorts of like extra, you know, you can run classes and you can do volunteer outreach and that kind of stuff, and you can get this roster of people who are all willing to kind of jump in and help you. But I think like from what I've heard from the kind of like campaign consultants and people like that is that the moderates have been doing, or these guys have been doing a better job at that kind of organizing, which is kind of unusual. I think generally it's the progressives who have had the...
If you have a labor movement that is getting out organized, you have fundamental problems.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, my understanding is, you know, it used to be like the progressives that would have the fun parties, like during the Chris Daly days. And now Grow SF. I mean, I think Abundant SF does events here at Manny's. Like there is this politics/socializing that is actually very important.
What's the one that puts the parties first?
We San Francisco, is that
they had a story in the Standard.
Yeah, We San Francisco.
I was confused by the story because there was a woman dressed like a circus acrobat in the photo, and I thought this explains everything. You know, why would I want to go to a party with a bunch of angry people? You know. Who are going to talk to me about the general strike? I could go to hang out with these guys, and they bring dogs. It's you know, there you go.
And it's also like one of the stated, I think a session from Grow SF said something on the grounds that, like, you know, we support all of these popular things as well, like supporting the keeping the highway closed, JFK closed to cars was like a super popular thing, and they threw their weight behind that, and so a lot of people see that and go, oh, that's a great thing. And they also do things like, you know, they've got the bold italic, which is like has a strong emphasis on positive news stories and stuff like that. So I think it brings people in that way.
And they have like trash collection. I mean, again, it's a smart organizing playbook. I mean, you bring people into happy hours and you hope that the 10% of the 200 people there, you sign up and join your newsletter and then go on and join your next event, and it works.
It absolutely worked in that last one. And I would say that, you know, many of you, if you live in San Francisco, probably noticed a dearth of mailers coming to your house, you know, with regard to the DCCC slates. And, you know, this isn't like signing up for KQED where you could say, like, will you stop with the commercials if I give you the money. The lack of mailers, especially getting toward election day, was telling. Mm-hmm. And in addition, there was the lack of messaging. You know, what consultants have told me is that it's on the supervisor candidates, it's on the mayor, well, less the mayoral candidates, it's on the supervisor candidates to make this a race among known quantities. If you allow your opponent to define who you are, and they have 10 times the money you do, you will lose. So especially if they are copying your playbook and doing it better than you. I don't know, does anybody like baseball? I like baseball, right? And I'm not an Oakland A's fan, but I did follow the whole Moneyball thing, and I understand on-base percentage and all this kind of stuff. And you don't have to, but you just have to know that this was meant to compensate for not having as much money. We're going to take a more intellectual approach to the game. But when people with money start copying your approach, you are done. So when Boston started doing it, when New York started doing it, the Oakland A's were done, right? So that's what's happened here. You know, if someone is copying your plan, they have much more money, therefore they can afford to make mistakes, they can afford to overspend, and you don't suddenly pivot, and also you don't say who you are done, right? We have a moment of levity here, the drunken doorman in the Macbeth scene, that says, I think I read that the San Francisco Sheriff's Union donated about $25,000 in support of the algebra measure. Can we expect them to do the same if trigonometry comes up? It would be a multiple. The last one I have here is, how does democracy survive against oligarch money? I think apropos to current goings-on in San Francisco, we just have to redefine what democracy is. No, I'm democratically elected. I studied it in college.
I don't know. I personally think it's kind of worrying that people don't care that a lot of the money for these things comes from the billionaires. I think you're right that a lot of people don't, and I don't really know what to do about it. I mean, we can keep showing that that's the case, but if people aren't interested, then I don't know. I think at least our role as journalists is to keep putting the information out there as clearly as we can, and let people do with it what they will.
And it's a known thing at this point that like Citizens United did not help, and this is a much worse problem at the federal level. Actually, we're lucky that we can actually make this kind of map, and this is a gray money map, not a dark money map, because we have some insight into the donor networks here. But on the federal level, it's totally worse, and at least when I spoke to folks who study campaign finance, they all told me that just voters get disinterested in elections the more and more money there is poured into it, and especially if they don't know where that money's coming from. So it's terribly worrying.
Of course, you can help democracy by donating to your local independent news organizations.
Which you should definitely do, and though that is a natural place to finish, I will indulge the young man in the front who looks alarmingly like my father. If you combined all the money spent by everyone, what would it be? I think we have a number here. I think it's,
See, the Guardian asked me that question as well. I didn't have a very good answer for that.
We're very, very thrilled that we got to have this in the Guardian UK, and I'm glad that I gave Will a reference as he heads back there and can finally stop writing flavor without a U. I know that was really a constraint, but they asked that question. What's the best answer, and why is the answer hard to give?
It's a really good question. And I'm gonna have...
Did you hear that? It's a really good question.
I'm going to have kind of a bad answer. But I guess what you can do is you could sum up all of the disclosed money for any given election. Like, for instance, this one was 11 million, I think, the March one. And you can also look at like individual donors and what they've given to certain causes. But it's super hard to say, this is how much is in this network. One, because, as I mentioned, a ton of it is not disclosed. If someone gives to a C4 and they do a load of issues advocacy, it doesn't get disclosed. They can spend that however they want because it's not giving to a direct candidate. So if you see all of the ads for like Together SF saying save our city and that kind of thing, but it doesn't mention any candidate or race, then you don't know who's funded that. And then there's stuff like the C3 giving to Jenkins. We don't know who gave money to that C3. And then there's stuff that it's kind of tricky to tell whether or not it's part of like for instance, as I said, like one of the biggest things up there is the payment to the San Francisco Standard, which is like, it's on there because, Michael Moritz was the guy who funded it, and he also funded Together SF. The CEO of the Standard is one of the guys who co-founded Together SF, and so it's kind of relevant, but it would be stretching it to say that all of that 10 million is part of this, grey money stuff. So, I hope that I haven't disappointed you with that answer, as I did the Guardian editors. But I think that's the most honest way of saying it, is you can sum it up for various elections, but in terms of saying like this is the network, then it depends on where you draw the lines.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out on a Tuesday. I want to re-up what Will said, surreptitiously mentioning, please do donate. This way we won't have to annoy you in December and all that kind of stuff. Missionlocal.org, and there are many buttons that you can click on. Checks, real estate, KARS for kids, all of that. Thank you for coming out on a Tuesday.